Hey everyone, welcome to the inaugural episode of the Cold Fish podcast. I did some podcasting for a little bit here and there years back on this channel, and I'm bringing it back. I've changed the name of the channel. Yes, this still is the channel that was called The Filth LA, and before that it was called Cheap Virtue. But The Filth LA it didn't kind of fit where things are going, and I've got a bunch of stuff I want to put out, and it just seems, for reasons that will become clear as I go, seems like a more fitting name. But regardless of whether you've been here before or not, welcome and thank you for watching. My name is Max, and I'm going to be doing this every Sunday, once a week. Just go. The range of topics will probably be pretty broad. I know there's people that are here for different reasons, but the largest amount of people are probably those that started when I was doing stuff on like a lot of political, social, like philosophical sorts of things. And that's still going to be the primary focus. And look, one of the reasons I started to do this now, and why I'm just doing it by myself and in this context, is not because there's something particularly rosy to talk about. It's actually something that's been on my mind a lot, and it's genuinely concerning to me. As you all know, we're currently at war with Iran for reasons that I find completely avoidable and nonsensical, frankly. And it looks like at this point there really is no actual objective. It seems like Trump has just been wanting to go back to the way things were before. He's talked about, have to make sure that they're not going to have nuclear weapons. And that's perfectly fine. The problem is, there was never any significant threat of that happening in the first place. And now they could have done it, right? But it was reported many times that before we invaded, there was already a deal that was struck that, by all accounts I've heard, was significantly better than the Obama-Iran nuclear deal. It did keep them from having a nuclear weapon. It actually insults the intelligence of a lot of people. And there wasn't even really an attempt to justify this war to anybody. It just sort of happened. And yeah, it's become this gigantic mess, as many of you all know. And unfortunately, it does seem like we are really at the point now where there's no end in sight, and this is going to have, if it stays on the course it is now, and we're kind of passing the point of no return. This is it, like right now. Like, no matter what, this has already had a huge impact, and most of the impact has not been felt yet. Like, the fact that so much gas is not going to be able to be accessed through the Strait of Hormuz, and now apparently it's going to be much more difficult in the Red Sea as well, because Iran has gotten really upset at us, and I'm sorry, it's understandably so, all things considered, or at least I don't understand why you would think they wouldn't be upset, all things considered, which I'll get into. But this is very likely going to lead us into a severe recession, if not depression. It is also single-handedly likely to be the thing that essentially ends U.S. empire, so to speak, as we know it. Because we have become an empire in the past number of decades. And while maybe in some ways it's healthier for us to not be an empire, it always seemed like kind of in conflict with a lot of the ideas of what America is supposed to be about. But the way it's happening and the kind of just ineptitude and cruelty and lack of principle that all of this is happening with is extremely upsetting. But, while I could do an entire episode on that, there's in particular something that seems to me to be almost like the final nail in the coffin, to where it's just like, if this happens, it will be so demoralizing, and it could genuinely solidify the United States being a very different place than it ever was, if not in reality, then very much conceptually, and with time, I'm sure it will have an actual significant impact. And that has to do with this Section 219, which this is something that's in the Defense Authorization Bill, which passes every year, and essentially funds the military. And within this bill, if you're watching this, you may already know about this, but within it, there is a provision that essentially merges or integrates the U.S. military and the state of Israel, the Israeli military. Now, I see a lot of people trying to kind of soft pedal this and say, really, it's just about so that we can, share our technologies with each other, and the Israelis, they've got some great stuff and whatever. But if you look into it, that's not what this is. That's not what this is. This is a big deal. For a variety of reasons, and what it says to the American people and what it says about our politicians, it's so much worse than even I thought it could be. Like, it is crazy to me that this is about to happen. And unfortunately, we now live in a world where it's the fact that it is the state of Israel within the particular context of everything that's going on. And in particular, a lot of things that are clearly going on that many people are ignorant of or are choosing to believe aren't true, despite such obvious evidence. If you are engaging with this in anything approaching a dispassionate and honest way. And for example, well, let's just start with this. it is quite clear that the reason we got into this war, and Secretary Rubio, who's about as pro-Israel as they get, said, that the reason we ultimately wound up going in is basically Israel said, we're going to attack, and they threatened to use nukes, apparently, against Iran. And that, if we didn't go in and attack, they were going to attack. And because in the Middle East, Israel and America are so coordinated, they're so kind of tightly knit, that it would be our bases that they ultimately would go after, and our allies in the Gulf. It is weird to me how little actually Israel itself gets hit. I guess maybe that's because you hear all these bases and things blowing up, and all the Gulf countries, and I don't hear that much about it happening in Israel. They've already destroyed. Iran's already destroyed like a lot of our bases. You can see video of it, and this isn't even really being reported on in the U.S. Like, the Iranians are wiping out the American bases of the Middle East. And we are now in a situation where Trump feels like he can't get out of this. And really now, just the longer it's gone on, the more I guess he feels that it would be a sign of weakness for him to just like walk away. And in this case, it wouldn't just be his ego, or although I'm sure his ego's enough, because Trump clearly knows that this is a disaster and it's just completely pointless. I think he knows that he was duped. And he was. That's quite obvious. Look, here's how I'm coming from this situation. I feel like I might be in a reasonably good position to be able to talk about this, because when you talk about this particular subject, especially anything around the state of Israel, there's a lot of smoke and a lot of heat that gets thrown up. You have, immediately kind of charges of antisemitism, of course. You name it. Everything is just, rather than addressing the points that you're making, you immediately go to the person's motives. And of course, that's, something that really annoyed a lot of people during the height of wokeness or whatever. It was always looking for corrupt motives. And I just think that in and of itself is not a good sign. When somebody is immediately going to motive, it's not good. All that starts getting thrown around, except it's actually worse in many ways, because it just doesn't end. In many cases, if you really get on the Israel lobby's bad side, it often doesn't just end with mean things being said on the internet. It can lead to really like a person's like destruction and their families. That's the thing, is like people, if you're critical of Israel and like kind of get on their radar, it seems like nothing is off limits, like including going after people's kids and getting their spouses fired. Like this has happened a lot. There doesn't seem to really be any limits. And then so there's that. And on the other side, because there really are lots of things where if you have a brain and the ability to look at this stuff dispassionately, there's a lot to be critical of. Certainly from an American perspective, and frankly, like from like a global perspective. There's a reason at this point why public sentiment on Israel has shifted so dramatically. People didn't just magically, start hating Jewish people, like, and a 40% swing in the opinion that people have about Israel. That didn't just happen because, I don't know, just because of magic. It's because of specific things that the Israeli government has done, and just as much so, just the way that lobby and people stateside and in the media and whatnot have chose to handle it. It's really turned a lot of people off, and it's actually it has stirred up, obviously, actual Jew hatred. It has. You see it online all the time, and there are people, again, on the other side of this. You also have people for whom there is no distinction between, and this is something that they share, the Israelis and the Jew haters both do the same thing, which is conflate the actions of the Israeli government with all Jewish people everywhere, like across the world, which it's just incorrect. It's just wrong. It's also, in both cases, I've come to think, genuinely bad faith. And I think it's not controversial to say, particularly controversial to say that it's bad faith on behalf of the anti-Semitic people. I think it's more controversial to say that I do think it's actually bad faith and even deceitful, actually, of aspects, powerful people within the Israeli government and their lobby, both here in America and abroad. And one of the reasons I feel like I can really get into this, for this shouldn't matter. It shouldn't. But look, I have both. On the one hand, I am Jewish. I'm not particularly Jewish culturally, and like genetically, it's just part of like a soup of different kind of European genetics. But yeah, my mother's mother's mother was Jewish, and that actually makes, because my grandmother, my Oma, was born in Germany, and she was Jewish because her mom was. She is a Holocaust survivor. Now that is a loaded term, and I don't want to cheapen it, because she never wound up in any camps or anything. Her grandmother did. She died on the train to Auschwitz. And her great aunt actually wrote a journal, or like a memoir, about her experiences, and I've read some of that. And like there's stuff in there that's like, makes Schindler's List look like, Bob the Builder's first playbook or something. Well, maybe not that much. I mean, there's some bad stuff in Schindler's List. But yeah, it's obviously very real and, very impactful. My grandmother's house, like her first memory is her house getting bombed when she was 5 years old, and like walking through the rubble and seeing a bunch of dead people. And yeah, so I have family on kind of both sides of that, because, her mom was was Jewish and her dad was German. And he was not a Nazi. He was not in the SS, as most people in the German army weren't. Like, everybody had to fight for the German army. But here's fundamentally my problem. Unless you already have very strong ideas about Benjamin Netanyahu and who he is and what he's about, and you're already super pro on his side, if you have an IQ above room temperature, to me at least, it's quite obvious that he has a certain amount of disdain for America. There are plenty of quotes from him saying, in the past, Americans are so easy to manipulate. It's so easy to control them. And Benjamin Netanyahu's an incredibly arrogant guy. And to be fair, he is, if you look him up, he's quite impressive in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong. The guy was in the Israeli Special Forces, and I think he went to MIT and then Harvard, or he's like an engineer and a Special Forces guy. He's a tough bastard in a lot of ways, but he's also I think the guy lies the way that most people breathe, and he does it without a hint of guilt or self-awareness or anything. He really seems like a guy, and this is not uncommon amongst the Israelis. It's they really think that they're always the smartest person in the room, and that everybody is so dumb that they can just kind of say whatever they need to, and everybody will fall for it. And if they don't fall for it, it's just because they didn't like you to begin with. It has nothing to do with your actual character as a person. But for example, what happened when getting into the war. Netanyahu said to Trump, if we go in and do this, the people of Iran will immediately rise up. They hate their government. They're going to take it over. I promise you. And of course, you go back decades, literally 30 years, and a lot of people know this. There's Benjamin Netanyahu going up there and promising up and down that he said the same thing about Iraq. I promise you, if you go in and you change the regime in Iraq, the reverberations will create peace in the Middle East. He's a guy who he literally says whatever needs to be said in a moment to get people to do what he wants them to do. But anyone, and Netanyahu convinced Trump that not only would this fall, but that they wouldn't close the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, literally all of his advisors, all of them, told him the opposite. And for whatever reason, Trump did it anyway. And yes, I do think that, I don't know what the nature of this is, whether it's, but there is a level of control that the Israel lobby has over Trump and his administration and politics in general that is genuinely distressing. And the context of this particular provision, literally, it strikes me, people who vote for this, and I do not say things like this. You will never, go back, watch any video. I do not I'm very careful about the kinds of things that I accuse people or states or anything of. And I say that this people who vote for this is like low key a form of treason. Truly. And the only way you can see it as not being that is if you have buried your head in the sand or have been so brainwashed by the propaganda or so scared by what the Israel lobby will do to you that you just kind of go along with anything that they say. So let me get down to the meat of my objections. Why I think this is such that this rises to the level of treason. Netanyahu gets us into the war, but yes, ultimately it's the president's decision. Not only is this someone that they wanted this war, and this is after, lied us into this war. Not only that, actively has worked to make sure that we can't get out of it. So, a few weeks ago, I was so relieved when, Trump and Vance came out and said, listen, we've signed this MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, and it's going to get the strait back opened, and, we're not, it's total ceasefire, and we're gonna make it so they don't have nuclear weapons and all of this. But essentially the fighting is over, and the strait's going to be back open, and we're going to have to pay for them to reconstruct some of their country or whatever. But Trump coming out and saying that the Israelis had to, basically being critical of them and the way they've handled certain things, just the indiscriminate nature of the kind of killing that they do, which they do. If you actually look into it and don't just turn your brain off, it's so brutal. It's so brutal and senseless. But there's a real issue of this compromising America's sovereignty in a very unique and specific way. A way that, if you haven't been kind of brainwashed into thinking otherwise, would be so obvious and so concerning to anybody. So not only, you have to think about it this way. Israel exists as it does, despite it being this teeny little country. It exists as it does and is able to throw its weight around to such an extent because the United States backs them. Not only is it the billions of dollars we give them every year, at minimum, in order to fund their military-industrial complex, but also the kind of latent threat of the United States in the background. Like if you want it messing with Israel, you're going to have to mess with the United States. And when it comes to their economy and a lot of how it works, in things like, for example, famously, in the United States, we don't have health care, we don't have child care, we don't have college and universities for free. The Israelis have all of those things. Literally, like they have generous welfare program and all of that. So there's all these investments actually going into their people. and they don't have budget deficits. I think they have like this, it's basically nothing. Like they're running things efficiently, right? But they're able to afford all this different stuff because of the amount of money and resources that we pour into the region, including spending $9 trillion fighting wars over in the Middle East. That it's becoming increasingly clear, one of the main objectives there was to assist Israel. That's one of the reasons we did this. It's, there were no WMDs in Iraq famously, and all of that. So it's like, but we go in anyways, and all the reasons we go into these things, if you look at them, they never really make sense. And it does make a lot of sense to me that there's a couple different things going on there. On the one hand, there's Israel, which has there's a lot of very affluent people in the United States, and not so affluent people who are very much on Israel's side and will, always want to give them the moon, essentially. There's that, and then there's also, we have this gigantic military industrial complex that is fully dependent on state funds, on funding from the military, and we spend a catastrophic amount on the military, and that gets a lot of people extremely rich. Like, people don't understand just how much money actually goes into this stuff. Like, if you look at, there was a girl, but regardless of the specifics of how screwed up we are in terms of the money we've spent, nonetheless, there's been a huge benefit towards Israel during that period of time, right? And it was our winning the war in 1945 that, paved the way for Israel to be created in 1948 in the first place. And then so when a country is the junior partner in something, and when they are, so dependent upon us, and it wasn't until Donald Trump, one of the things I like about what he did, it wasn't until he got back into office this last time, I think this is when he did it, but Israel, on top of it all, they had a bunch of tariffs on us. Like, with all of that on top of it, and we're talking about tariffs, they had tons of tariffs on us in order to incentivize, people in Israel making more things, and helping the workers there, which, in and of itself is not a bad thing, but it's just another thing where it's like, this country is totally dependent on us, and to such a catastrophic degree, and yet at every turn, certainly recently, with this particular government, and it seems to be just kind of in the zeitgeist over there right now, there's just, they don't, not only do they not listen and are completely indifferent to our struggles here, they seem to genuinely go out of their way to rub it in our face. And frankly, it's beginning to look more and more like, I think they're actually kind of rooting for us to fall. Specifically so that they can kind of become a superpower in their own right. Netanyahu's already come out and said that he thinks that Israel at this point really is like a superpower. And given what they were able what they were able to do and the kind of mess they were able to get us in, you know, it seems like they could very well be on the way to doing that. But see, the problem is we have enough problems with Israel not listening to us, or just like demonstrating, frankly, like a lot of like disdain, certainly with this current cabinet in Israel. Not only that, but on top of all of that, these people who have been so terrible for us are now gonna actually be within our government and dealing in the most sensitive areas of our government, dealing with our intelligence, which we'd have to give them. Essentially having access to everything of value that's ours as it relates to the military and intelligence. In essence, they have access to with very little oversight. So the president himself, I believe, cannot prevent certain intelligence from being shared with the Israelis, or certain military projects. Like, they have complete access to all of our stuff, and I can promise you that in effect that won't go both ways. Like, that's clearly just not the way this kind of stuff works. So look at it this way. Like, after all of that, just to add insult to injury, not only are, we basically pay for your existence and protect your existence, you intentionally, certainly it looks to me, because Netanyahu is not a stupid guy, got us into this war so that we can take on somebody that you've wanted to take out for decades, but are not willing to fight yourself. Like, Israel isn't fighting alongside us. Like, they're gonna do some bombing, but they're not gonna send people on the ground there. No, they've used this time, while we're fighting Iran, to start annexing parts of Lebanon and just wiping people out. Like, just civilians, whatever, Christian, Muslim, it doesn't matter. Just, Ben Gvir came out. It's like some of the stuff he said that, for every Israeli mother's tear, there needs to be 1,000 Lebanese mothers' tears for each one. Granted you, this is something he said, and he said Lebanon must burn it all down. Like, it's so insane, some of the stuff this guy is saying. And this is a guy, by the way, who, Ben Gvir, who has had up on his wall for years. He had a poster of this man who he held in high regard. This is like so cartoonishly evil. And this is, one of the national security advisor. There, he's one of the most, like 3 or 4 most powerful people in Israel, in the Israeli government. He had a poster of this guy who was a mass shooter, a serial killer of innocent Palestinians just for its own sake. So there's this guy who, for no reason at all, just because he didn't like them, and he was a Jewish supremacist, as increasingly a lot of people in Israel, I'm sorry to say, truly are. They are supremacists in their outlook, and they clearly see people that aren't, of their own, aren't part of the tribe, are subhuman. And that seems to be, thankfully, that seems to be a thing that's much, much more prevalent in Israel than it is in America. But I'll get to that later, because it is an important distinction, and is very and ties into what I was saying earlier about kind of the differences in culture in America, in Israel, both for Jews and Gentiles alike. It's significantly different. So this gives you a certain look into not just a random person in Israel, but like one of the most influential people in that entire place. But what's important to say is, when he's talking about Lebanon, the Lebanon needing to burn, it's not because Lebanon did so much, or they came in and they attacked Israel and whatever it is, but like he wants them all to suffer. He wants that many mothers to suffer for every Israeli woman's tears, or Jewish Israeli woman in particular. 1,000 Lebanese mothers need to suffer for people protecting their home. Like, I don't know how you soft pedal that. I don't know how you see that as anything other than, like, the man is a psychopath. That is a psychopathic thought. Some of the behavior, did you see when people came, they were bringing aid. It was like Greta Thunberg and a bunch of people bringing aid into Israel, and they were all like locked up, or they were handcuffed and whatever, and he was coming up and like taunting them and like making faces. It was just like, this is a guy who's like, what has been like, I guess, allowed culturally there is like it's cartoonish levels of like supremacist ideas and behavior. Like, it would sound, one of the reasons that it's hard to deny, and one of the reasons I'm saying this in the first place, is it's, once you look into it, it's so blatant. It's so comedic. Like, how it's almost, if it wasn't so sad, it would be funny because of how absurd it is and what an inversion of reality it is versus what we've been told most of my life. It's like that there are these terrible people, that there's this Hezbollah, there's all these people that are attacking Israel, and they're just because they're mean and bad, and it's jihadism and stuff. When you actually like look into it, it's just like, no, not really. And so I'm truly beginning to think that a lot of this, they all hate us, they all want to kill us, all this stuff, I think a lot of it is projection. Like, there's a lot of projection that goes on with Israel. Like, it's bizarre to what extent this tends to be the case. And in many cases, or in some cases, I'm sure that the accusation that they're making is also accurate, or I'm like open to the idea that maybe the accusation they're making is true of the people they're talking about too, to some degree. But it's one of those situations where kind of every accusation is a confession, which is, apparently projection is like, I just found this out recently. Everybody can project to some extent, but the people that do it a lot, it's actually like one of the symptoms of narcissism. And like, it does seem like if you're in a supremacist culture, which many people in Israel seem to be, that is a kind of it's like a kind of ethno-narcissism. So you assume the worst in yourself is what everybody's thinking. It's always the most cynical, corrupt motive on the behalf of everyone else. And yet the people that I actually see behaving this way it's much more clearly with the Israelis. Like I hear about all these bad motives and stuff from, the other countries there, but that's not what I actually see. And believe me, it would make my life a lot easier to just think, no, these people are bad, that Iran, somebody had to do something, all of that. But the problem is, I just don't. There's nothing that Iran has done that I've seen in the years we've been dealing with them, and I'm like reading all the reports. There's nothing that they've done that has not, from their perspective, just not as religiously or anything else, just as like a nation state that is behaving, rationally in its own self-interest. There's been nothing I've seen other than that, which is not really the signs of some theocratic, crazed, jihadist wants to convert everybody or blow up the world thing. I think that the Israelis have genuinely become kinds of supremacists, like kind of ethno-supremacists. But to the point I was getting to earlier about just what a slap in the face all of this seems to be. In addition to all of this, for example, and I could go through, there's so many things like this, but one of the things that we sorted out in the MOU in order to get us out, people say Trump's angry because the Iranians broke the memorandum of understanding. It's like, no, they didn't. We did. We didn't follow through on our end of the bargain. One of the things, and by the way, Netanyahu knows that we're about to like totally crumble. Like this is going to destroy us. And again, I think that's the point to some degree. I do. I'm sorry to say that, but like that's what seems to make the most sense, actually. One of the requirements in the MOU in order to get them to open the strait and for us to continue negotiating kind of, in good faith, or having like talks that move forward where we can actually resolve the nuclear issue and whatever else, said Israel has to get out of southern Lebanon. So in other words, the land that they'd been annexing and just, by the way, just indiscriminately killing people. They always say it's terrorists, but it's not. I saw an interview with an IDF soldier who the guy was saying, have you killed kids? Have you killed kids? He says, yes, I've killed kids. And he says, why do that or whatever? And he said, they are terrorists. And we're talking about like little kids. These were not combatants. He said like babies and stuff too. And he was like, yes, it is good to do. And he said it like, yes, like he's enjoying. It's comedic. And obviously I don't think they're all like this by a long shot. But the idea is that they're terrorists. Like all of them, in some of these people's minds, certainly, is that they're all terrorists. Like just by the way that they're born, they all want to kill you, and they're all just these terrible people, and you should take them out. no matter what they've done. So we always hear that there's these terrorists that are attacking them and they're defending themselves. But in actuality, that's not by any reasonable standard, if you're on the outside looking in, that's just not the case. They're very much the aggressors in these situations. So we say, after doing all this stuff for this country, we say to them, yeah, you've got to get out of southern Lebanon. Listen, the war's been going on. You said that the regime was going to fall. It didn't work out that way. We kept going. We took out all their stuff. We did it for months. But now it isn't going to work. And, we're going to be able to get out of this war and whatever. We'll regroup. No harm, no foul. Israel, they now know that Iran's military has been weakened to some extent. They know we really mean business. We did destroy Fordo, that nuclear program, despite the fact that there really didn't seem to be any danger of them getting a nuke. Not at the moment. They didn't really seem like they had an interest in doing so. Despite all of that, even if I just ignore all of that, Trump saying, okay, well, we did that. And even though we've given you all this money for your war in Gaza, we helped pay for it. It's not a fucking war. You saw what it was. It's ethnic cleansing at minimum, but they destroyed it. Some would say a genocide, and that could very well be. It's at minimum an ethnic cleansing. We paid for that too. And then when we want to get out of the war that is going to collapse us, not only do they not do it, Netanyahu, and this is what he does this consistently. Trump says on Twitter or on Truth Social or whatever he's doing, he says, Israel must leave Lebanon immediately, or I'm forbidding Israel from attacking this or doing this or whatever. Within an hour or two, without fail, Netanyahu does it. And not in and sometimes just totally unnecessarily, just as a fuck you. He wants to let him know. He's trying to let all of us know, frankly, who's boss. I mean, the guy, we're having negotiations. Again, their ally is having negotiations to try to get them what they want, or what they say they want, which is them not to have nukes. But that's not the goal. It's not the goal. Because as soon as Trump came out with saying, hey, we can make sure that they don't have nukes, which is what Netanyahu, that was the justification for the bombings earlier. It was the justification for this war and whatnot. Netanyahu immediately changed it and says, and they need to give up all their ballistic missiles, the ballistic missile program. So wait a second. Trump actually gets this deal, or apparently a deal, was there to do this. And he gets what you're saying, and then he completely changes it and says get rid of their ballistic missiles. You know why he says that? Because there's no way that's going to happen. And also they said they want them to not be. And before that, he said they can't enrich any uranium at all, even for nuclear power, which is a big difference. That you only need to enrich 2 or 3% for nuclear power, as to where it needs to be 90% or 95% or whatever in order to actually have a nuclear bomb of any kind. So he says, no, you can't have that. And of course, like, they have a right to have nuclear power. It's actually explicitly, if they're signed on to this treaty people have on like how you can use nuclear. And so Netanyahu says, no, he can't have that. He can't have that at all, regardless of the inspections and everything else, which they always complied with. Again, they always complied with these inspections, and they honored their side of the thing. And they always have. But Netanyahu comes out and he says, you need to get rid of their ballistic missile program. So you know what that's saying? That's basically just saying you have to they need to not be able to defend themselves at all. So in other words, if they didn't have a ballistic missile program, given the way it appears the Israelis think, they would just turn around and totally, steamroll right over them. Right? Like, that's clearly, like, if you don't want them to be able to defend themselves at all, not they can't nuke us or anything like that, just that they can't, like, everybody has an army, it's like a big country, they got 90 million people. Wait, they're not going to have ballistic missiles? Like, what are you even talking about? But he says it because he's always just trying to get whatever he wants. I can't stand people that are like this. The worst thing, where everything you're doing at any given time, you're never just being honest with people. You're never having the respect to them to just level with them and say, hey, this is what's going on. Whether they're your friends or your foes, you're always working them. Always. And that's what Netanyahu does. That's certainly the way it looks to me. And so, yeah, Netanyahu, despite all of that, consistently does the things to make sure we can't get out of the war. And multiple times within this conflict, we're having negotiations with people. And then the Israelis will assassinate them. There was a story in the New York Times that came out. Even this is happening. Story in the New York Times came out when this section 219 or 224 or whatever it was called at the time, when this was added anonymously, and it was anonymous because nobody wants to take credit for it, even though they're all voting for it, and amendments were blocked, so they weren't able to even discuss it. Massey's amendment to discuss it and ask questions about it in Congress was shot down. Like, it's insane, because they know that if people heard what it was and it was discussed, people would be like, absolutely not. It's because they can't. They know this is treasonous on some level. That's why no one's taking credit for it and no one wants to argue it. They want to slip it through, right? But regardless, intelligence, somebody from high up in the intelligence came out in the New York Times and said that Israel is literally the number one spying threat to the United States. The level of tactics they use, the extremes that they go to, just, I don't know, everything they quantify it by. He said that they're like easily the most dangerous people in terms of how they spy and the techniques that they use and the level of a security risk that it is. So with all of that being the case, and I could go on for like a long time. And the more you look into it, it's like, how is this even happening? Like, how are people okay with this, and or such cowards? With all of that being the case, when they're still technically something separate from us. By the way, Israel isn't even, we don't even have a treaty of any kind with Israel. This is a one-way relationship. So with all of the others, the countries that we're allies with, they're allies because we're actually technically allies. In other words, there are certain things that we'll do for one another as like friends, so to speak, that if somebody's in trouble, I've got your back. When I get in trouble, you've got my back. So obviously Israel's a much smaller country, but there are certain things that, you would want to count on them for. And we have no treaty of any kind with Israel. So in other words, they have no obligations to us whatsoever. It's a one-way street. And that says a lot. And by the way, they also gave us the intelligence for all kinds of intelligence for, going into Iraq and stuff. It seems to me, it's never just sharing the information or just like doing what friends do. There's always an angle. They're always working you. And that's who Bibi Netanyahu is, apparently. And you see it with him. And this is really the bottom line. A country that does that, we're now going to merge our military, meaning they are now in the Pentagon. We already have enough problems to where it seems like they have way too much control. We're now going to let them actually be in our actual military. And this is actually, to me, this is actually scarier than the military aspect. It's the intelligence aspect. The president himself, it's my understanding, can't stop certain information from being shared with them. They're supposed to get any information we have, they're supposed to also have, if they want it. Think about how much sensitive data. Think about the NSA, like basically, as far as I understand it, probably has every phone call you've ever made, every text, everything. And then now they're going to have access to all of that. And with the level of brutality that we've seen and the level of disrespect and frankly just all out hostility there's been towards anybody that's deemed an enemy, or people you say are friends, what do you think they're going to do with that? We know Mossad operates in the United States all the time, right? We know that probably, there are people, probably engaging in all sorts of blackmailing and God knows what else. You don't think that they're gonna get their hands on intelligence about people in America and then, maybe people who make videos like this, for example, who knows what could happen to them? Because we already know they're apparently above the law, right? If the president of the United States can come out and say, despite you can't do this, even though those are our bombs and our everything else, that's right now when we're technically two separate entities. You think if they wanted to do something in the interior of America, like just small, quiet, as few people know about it as necessary, and there's somebody that's causing them trouble, you don't think they just can't get everything they need to destroy that person or worse? Think about the amount, especially with AI coming in, think about the amount of power that's giving them. And all the power that they have over us, they've used in really malicious ways. And these people in Congress, I've come to realize it's like, you actually, apparently the way this works, you actually don't want the best and brightest to be in Congress. Like, that's not what the people who fund all of this, or like the billionaires or whatever, like getting people into Congress. You want people who just are stupid enough or corrupt enough to sort of believe what they're told to believe. And if you do have misgivings about what's going on, you just roll with it. And when somebody stands up like Thomas Massey did, and he wasn't even like a heavy Israel critic until all of this started happening. Once they started genuinely going after him, that they primary him, they get him kicked out of Congress. So if you have any intelligence at all, or any like respect for the American people, you can see how dangerous this is. And to me, it's not a question of if this will be used for corrupt ends. It's a matter of when it'll be used for corrupt ends, if it does indeed pass, which it's gotten past the House. It's going through the Senate next. And if it gets past that, this is going to go in. And the thing is, it can't be undone. And to top it all off, Benjamin Netanyahu himself wrote this. So we have a foreign head of state who is more than happy to ignore the president, who's done more for Israel than any president ever has. Ignores him in order to keep them into a war that's just about to potentially just cause a huge collapse in the country that you owe everything to. You do that, you're that uncaring and that just, you're that much of a scumbag that you won't do that just out of like even just the appearance of decency. And this is the stuff we see out in the open. What do you think is going on behind the scenes? A person can't do that. A foreign head of state that has done, by his actions, in effect, more damage to the United States than any of our enemies have recently. Not that I can think of. And you're going to let that person, people you don't even have a formal treaty with or an allyship with, even though they're the model ally, they aren't anything. We give them stuff. And maybe what they give us sometime is some intelligence that is usually doctored to get us to do something. Because again, they don't view us as like equals, like you're two people and we're talking. They look down on us. And think we're dumb enough to fall for all of this stuff. And for a long time we all did. But then we turn around and it's just like you give us no other choice. And then that person turns around, writes legislation. And then it's included in a bill, and almost every single Republican votes for it, and many Democrats. It's so crazy when you lay out what this actually is, and what kind of implications that this could have. This is a coup, essentially. In effect, this is a kind of a coup. And I see like Ben Shapiro coming out. It's like, this isn't, whatever. This isn't. It's because Ben can't see the situation clearly, or he's just willing. He's playing dumb and is willing to lie because he just thinks what's good for Israel is good for the United States, just by default, because that's what's convenient for him to believe. I'll say again, I've never been more like exasperated and like disappointed in our leadership than when I see this. This whole war has been ridiculous and so stupidly put together and so awful, so evil, frankly. And that at every turn I've seen Iran actually be straightforward, pretty reasonable in what they're actually saying, and consistently. It's only until, later down the line, now they're starting to actually get upset with us. And it's like, they were so reasonable for so long. They did not act like these crazed people. Like, they just didn't. That's why they were warning us when responding to Fordo. They warned us, hey, just make sure no one's at your base. Like, that's not crazed psychopaths. That's people that are like trying to avoid a conflict, and clearly they're more than capable than actually having a conflict with us. That was just them showing restraint, wanting peace. Like, that's the most reasonable way of looking at this. But people forget that this isn't Yemen. This isn't some small poor country. It's Iran. It's Persia. It's Persia. It was an empire. They've been there for thousands of years doing this, and they have like a rich cultural history. It's in 300. The Xerxes, the king with all the nose things and whatever. It's them. It's their descendants. They're very bright people. They're very, very educated, very liberal-minded in many ways. Like, there's no reason these people couldn't just be our friends. Like, I'm sorry. Like, there's definitely some stuff, but they're like, actually, they should at least not be our enemies. This is insane. And I'd go deeper into some of the even more sinister implications of this, in terms of what my fear is all of this is about. Ultimately about sort of taking down the United States so that the bottom falls out and everybody's desperate, and we bring in a new system where we're all very much controlled. And the reason people say, oh, well, it's conspiracy theory, it's like, guess what, guys? Conspiracies make the world go around. That's a fact. Everybody believes in conspiracies because at this level, everybody conspires. Everybody conspires. Sometimes overtly, sometimes it's more of an emergent phenomenon, but this is just the way the world works. And right now, we're about to let in, the fox into the hen house. And it can't be allowed. This can't be allowed to pass. It can't be. We're getting really close to a point where people feel like, the process as we know it isn't working anymore, and that something more drastic would have to be done. I can feel that. I can feel it all around me. Whether the people in power want that to be the case or not, like, no one trusts you anymore. And they're not just, we can't take this lying down. I'm sorry. If you have a modicum of respect for any of us left, or any spine at all, please, Congress and people are watching, like whomever, like, we can't let this happen. Anyways, I went on for probably way too long. But for those of you who are still watching at this point, thank you. I know it was a lot. But yeah, I'll be doing this every week. Hopefully not always on such serious a topic. But thank you for watching. And hopefully I'll see you next time.